Good. It's funny that we have to pretend like we haven't been talking for a couple minutes already.
It's always awkward.
What's going on? How's the world?
It's pretty good, man. It's sunny here, not raining.
Yeah.
Hopefully get some snow, but going pretty well.
All right, cool. Well, I know you very, very well, but for everybody else, this is Matt Quirie, who's the CEO of ROI-DNA. He's actually the co-CEO of ROI-DNA, which is a B2B performance agency. They do really, really great work, and I've worked with them many times. But do you want to just give everybody a little background about ROI-DNA, Matt?
Yeah, sure. So we're the premier B2B digital marketing agency that really focuses on account-based marketing or account-based experience. We're about 200 people globally now, about 100 in North America, and we help big companies, medium to super large, help talk to their ideal client profiles in a digital format through account-based experience.
Cool. And you've been doing this for how long now? Has it been 10 years? 12 years?
Way too long.
Yeah,
14.
14 years.
Yeah.
And you and I, we do go back, and
Yeah.
the way that you address performance marketing versus sort of a standard approach, can you just tell the differences? What's the philosophical view there?
Yeah, I'd say we have no standard marketing approach here. It's all performance based. So, the vast majority of what we do is tied to a return on ad spend. So how much are we actually making for every dollar we spend back? And that's usually a multiple of that dollar. In all the good scenarios, it's a multiple of that dollar,
Mhm.
not a fractional multiple. So a 2x, 4x, 5x of what I'm spending on marketing. Even if we're doing any type of brand awareness, we're tying that back to a metric that is, how is that affecting the direct channels? How's that uplifting the other channels? Really looking towards cost of sales, right? So, everything we do is going to be tied to either a direct metric on sales achieved in this side, a secondary metric to engagement, such as how many people attended the webinar that we actually set up for the B2B company, or a tertiary can be kind of the vanity metrics, but we're really highly focused on the actual everything is going to be a conversion metric based.
Mhm. Mhm. And you guys have been successful, I think, for two reasons. Obviously, delivering results, which you
Yeah.
just kind of alluded to when you talk about, but also because you've done a really good job of building a culture, and the culture of your agency and how you all do your work and how you all balance life, work, fun, play, etc. Talk a little bit about how culture is for you. What's important about it? What works? What doesn't?
Yeah, well, that's a fun one. I'd say culture is the team, so it's not just me, right? I might have
Yeah.
started this thing, but it's really the effort of the team building the culture together. And it's been on the website in some format, number 4 here. So we bring your whole self, be inventive, do it right, and no assholes. And the fourth one's been on the website 14 years. The first 3 have some format of that. But we're really intent on having a culture that supports each other. And one of the things that we really talk about here is that this is a team. So your family and friends and your life is first. Come kick ass with the team if your family's doing okay, right? So we don't pretend that this company is a family. It's a lot of bullshit in the last 5 years about this is a family. We got to blah blah blah. It's not, man. Work should be fun. It should be invigorating. It should be exciting. It should be challenging. But we really encourage people to say like, hey, come kick ass with the team. But if you got family issues and your friend stuff, go fix that first and take care of yourself. And it's really important that helps, I think, build a culture of really looking out for each other,
Mhm.
really, and making sure. I think we started with a blind eye towards hiring in the very start. We are 80% identify female. I'm the only male executive and I'm a co-CEO. We've really, really, really kind of bent the culture rules or what was, supposed to be corporate culture for that. And I think if you do that and you get people a warm, supportive environment, that it really fosters a sense of how you're going to hire the next person and who's going to come on next and how you're going to integrate them within the culture. We have also an aspect of it where we've been using radical candor, which is a pretty well-known kind of philosophy out there. We were using some format before it was termed, but I think for us, it's really we encourage people if there's something feeling off even in that culture. So we've built all these good people we've hired, and we've encouraged people to be transparent and everything. But if something feels off, the sooner you really talk about that offness with that person directly, the more you're enabled to really kind of probably have a better relationship with them going forward. And we're basically encourage that across the board.
Yeah. And is this something that did you read about this and say, hey, that's interesting, I want to go try to implement that? Or was this just what felt right and you decided to follow a path and it took you to where you are?
The latter. So it felt right. I, as you know, much to the chagrin of my own success in corporate cultures, blew myself out of them miserably because either someone was BSing or someone was being an asshole. It didn't last long with me, and then I didn't last long at those places.
Mm,
So this whole place was started pretty much out of my frustration of kind of a corporate culture as a status quo.
I
And
remember.
luckily, we've got, yeah, and you were at one of those places. But luckily, we really the team itself that's fostered around this now, they're the ones really championing through this and really kind of building the new culture as we grow right now. And I
Mm,
think that, without the people who joined, I wouldn't be able to do this at all. So it's really about kind of enabling others to help kind of be champions of the culture as you grow too. And no culture is perfect. I think
yeah.
it's hard to stand up to the values. That some of the hardest things we had are like, when we put no assholes on the site, do we really abide by that? And we've had to, basically say goodbye to some pretty senior people on the team over the course of 14 years, because it wasn't the right fit for them at that time. And luckily most of those all, amicably, but I think when you really look at it, it started out of kind of frustration, not reading. I read a lot, but I don't usually read self-help books. I read a lot of
Yeah.
hopefully sci-fi and a space kind of like physics books. But for me, it's more so what feels right in your gut.
Yeah. And I think you've done a really good job, an interesting job, like you just mentioned, where you've had to make changes, some of your executive team or some of the other key components of your teams. You've
Yeah,
made changes all the way throughout, but you've still been able to maintain two things. One is this positive culture, and even like you said, the people that ended up leaving, in many cases, they knew it wasn't to fit either. So
yeah.
as you call it out, being amicable, it's just something that worked out for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are hard conversations too, right? Eventually, it really comes down to, can you have an open conversation with someone? And a lot of these things that you and I have experienced in corporate culture, people are afraid to talk about because of, HR issues or lawsuit stuff. And I think we've worked really hard to, one, respect everyone's diversity and inclusion here, but also peel back to have real conversations if people are actually having communication issues together,
Mhm.
or just not on the same plane, or if things are off. It's really not being scared to just have a real conversation, saying, "Hey, I don't think this is the right fit for you. Here's why," and
Mhm.
and have an open conversation. I'd say like probably 70% of the time when you do that, people realize it isn't,
Yeah.
and I think that helps them out too, because I think not everything's perfect. So like every situation, you've got different managers, different people. You're not going to have everyone react the same way. So the more you can encourage the openness, the more it helps out, even though there's through tough times sometimes.
Yeah. Now, what about the flip side of all this? Because sometimes culture is influenced heavily, especially in the agency world, by the people you service, so your client.
Yeah.
So I
Uh,
know that you've had clients that were really, really difficult. Clients can be very prickly. They can be agitators in that type of environment. How do you deal with situations like that? Because you can't just go fire all the clients.
no, but luckily we've had a diverse enough group of clients that we have been able to fire a few, and
Yeah.
that is usually what happens. It's not the person that you worked with through the sales cycle, because we have I'd say we filter out 99% of the people who would not work well with our culture, from that person, like that perspective. But it's usually when someone on the client side is a net new in terms of owning the relationship. We work really hard to say, hey, we know you didn't choose us. Let us talk to you about how we were formatted. Let's talk to you about why this partnership's awesome. But ultimately, it's their decision, right? But a lot of those, when they do turn, sour, acrimonious in those client relationships, it's usually a lack of communication or a lack of listening, or someone has it in their heart that they've got their favorite agency. Well, that's fine. We've got termination language people can pull in 90 days, which, you're never going to win every client, but we work really hard to get over that. If it doesn't get over that, and if someone is grinding our employees to the ground with just bad tone, demeaning language,
Mhm.
time and time again, we'll address it straight up. But then if it doesn't work, we'll pull the 90-day trigger ourselves. And I think we've
Yeah.
done that with some pretty big companies. We've fired a couple of multi-billion-dollar companies because it was hurting our culture. So it was just such a disruptor.
Yeah. Well, and you did so, and the company, like your business, didn't really falter. So it's almost an interesting proof point that culture can overcome any kind of challenges in revenue because a good culture can go out and get more revenue.
Yeah. If you're focused on culture, I think it can. And I think eventually you have to be patient with the revenue side though too. I think there's a a couple factors of this. One, we've all seen the economy the last couple of years, right? So everyone's had to do layoffs. I think was a Nintendo CEO who just put out a statement about not laying off, which I
I don't
super
know. Yeah.
admire. Yeah, it's a cool thing in terms of, and I too believe in this philosophy, and we're part of a larger company right now, which is it's an awesome umbrella, and we've got these partner sister companies to work with, and it's a killer growth thing, but beholden to stockholders and stuff like that. It's interesting to see how cultures have shifted in the last 2 years, and looking
Yeah.
at there is I've had a philosophical belief in growth over time. And even when we've had downturns in that, because of that, lost a company or whatnot, it always grew back stronger. We've always been up and to the right. And you've got the troughs though, right? You're up and to the right, but you've got some valleys to go through. The longer you think you can hold on to not disrupting for just pure financial means, meaning it's investing, it's an investment. So that's, I mean, it comes back to like, how much are people willing to invest in cultures? I know some agencies that they don't do that. As soon as they lose a big client, they're hacking that team,
Yeah.
and that's been a big, huge part of agency life. And since I didn't come from agencies and went from internal, I didn't really have that perspective. Like that was the norm.
Mm.
So, like everyone's had a layoff, we've had a layoff this time, but we really try not to do stuff like that. And that by having a diverse set of companies as our clients, which we have dozens and dozens of clients instead of one big single whale, that helps a lot.
Yeah. And then how do you manage to maintain this culture remotely? Because your teams are very remote.
Yeah, we actually made a pretty core decision in October 2020, which is pretty early. No one was really going full remote yet. I mean, everyone was at home, but
Right.
we got rid of our Austin and San Francisco offices, and just because we really weren't having client meetings in person very rarely. We loved having an office, both offices, but we didn't know when things were going to come back to normal after COVID. And we're looking at just we functioned really well remotely before because we always had to work from home Thursday we switched to I think every other week was 2 days when one was 3 days in the office. And so we learned along the way that we could communicate. We, put the tools in Zoom
Yeah.
or whatever iteration of video conferencing was at the time, Fuse, Zoom, there's 10 different ones, WebEx. Then we also Slack in communication. Um, but we also, there's when we went remote, there were a couple times where like a little getting people face to face like this is much more encouraging, much more quick Zoom calls, much more pass bys, and trying to a little bit like implement what you get in the office. Because what you miss is those drive-bys, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as much efficiencies as you probably get from not having as many drive-bys as I would in an office, I'm still losing that culture of a little bit of that. So we encourage people to have, just hop on a Zoom, talk really quick instead of a Slack sometimes if it's a quick question. And we have culture events. So we have, like basically brown bag lunches all together. We have different groups discussing how they function with the organization, what they bring to the clients. We have
Mhm.
kind of show and tell days, and we have a bunch of functions there. We weren't able to do last year, but the year before last, we took everyone to a location. And I think getting people together. We are now going to start hopping managers to zones in terms of like, maybe twice a year, get them into the groups eventually and
Yeah.
just be able to have people together. I just had 5 or 6 people over my house this last week, which is awesome. I think you got to foster that. I think we're going to stay remote, which is, the way direction we've kind of put a line in the sand, but I think we're learning what things to add to keep the culture thriving.
Yeah. Those getting together things are really, really important. I know that even
Yeah.
for our company, we do that probably once a month or once every other month. We get people together. We're much smaller, so it's a little
Yeah.
bit easier. But when you have 200 people, trying to get them together once a year is actually a really, really valuable thing.
Totally. Yeah. And I've seen companies do this really well. I've seen companies do this poorly. I will not name either. We had 2 companies. This is before remote work was a thing, 2 very
Yeah.
large companies. One's public now, one was not. And the cultures couldn't be more different in the remoteness.
Yeah.
I think one of the important things is turning on your damn camera. And I'll just say it, like when I show up to a meeting with a company, even a client, and no one's on camera, I'm like, oh crap. Like
That's not going to go well.
there's no body language. There's zero. So you can't even glean if someone's upset about something. And if all of you're going off is voice and tone, like, none of us are trained voice experts of learning tone through just a phone call
Sure.
unless you know the person well, right? So a lot of that stuff is really kind of encouraging good communication, getting people like this. You got to see each other,
Yeah.
and as much as possible, just having that be the norm. So yeah.
But last question then.
Okay.
Do you have a culture doctrine? Do you write all this stuff down, or is it just something that you abide by?
Those top four, bring your whole self, be inventive, dude, right? No assholes, just kind of govern it, right? You can write paragraphs about this stuff if you want, or
Yeah.
books. There's been books written about this. There's no assholes book I didn't even know about when we had the policy. So um I think for us, it's yes, we have a lot of culture stuff written in our handbook, and the basic stuff about that. I do think how the probably one of the center cornerstones of creating good culture when you grow to this size, having a strong and really integrated onboarding process.
Hmm.
And we just had two people go through it who are super senior, like your and my level of multi years of experience, too many years, right? Just onboarded. And what I was really humbled by was it basically saying, hey, this is one of the best onboarding experiences I've had in any company size, just because they felt so just
That's
deep
awesome.
in depth in the culture. Yeah. And that's one of the things like, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so freaking stoked because like that means the team is humming. That means people are really they're getting what we're trying to put across.
Right.
And I didn't create that. The person in HR created that environment,
That's
that
cool.
actually brings on board. And the team that they onboard with brought that environment. So, I think the biggest thing to come back from this is like the number one thing for me is team in a
Hmm.
culture. And the number one thing for all those people on the team is to take their family and friends first and then come kick ass at this team. And I think that's coming across pretty well. We can always improve.
Awesome. Well,
Cool.
thanks for taking the time, Matt. And
All right.
hopefully we have no assholes that watch this video either.
Woohoo. Thanks,
Thanks.
Corey.